This is a symptom of 20 plus years worth of manipulated interest rates. And when you mess with Mother Nature will have her pound of flesh. One way or another, all governments have chosen the path of least resistance, which is inflation. I don't think they'll confiscate gold the way Roosevelt did in 33 over my shoulder, because you have like GLD and SLV held by JP Morgan and BlackRock and HSBC Bank, so they can come and take all the ETFs, which you can't take possession of anyway. In a world edging towards economic collapse and societal upheaval,
we're up against a real polycrisis.
Inflation is eating away at our savings.
A shaky banking system is putting our financial security at risk.
Government debt
There's unthinkable record highs.
and the wealth gap keeps growing thanks to an unjust monetary system.
Add in AI,
And advances in longevity disrupting jobs.
a looming property crisis,
Geopolitical tensions.
and it's clear we've got our work cut out for us.
Our podcast is here to offer some hope
We're all about navigating these challenges by advocating for sound money principles.
and smart use of tech,
Our goal is to help you take control of your financial future
showcasing resilience, determination,
and practical solutions in these turbulent times. My name is Jason Cozens, founder and CEO of gold currency platform Glint.
and I am Andy Schectman, CEO of gold bullion dealer Miles Franklin. Welcome to the Resilient Compass podcast.
A quick one before we get back to this episode. Just give me 30 seconds of your time. There are two things I want to say. The first one is I want to say a big thank you to the army of you who already work with us as clients and who support our mission. And for those taking the time to tune in and listen to the show today, your support is very important. And secondly, we are just getting started. And if you like what we are doing, please hit the subscribe button and add your comments below. We need to know what matters to you. It is really important to help us grow and spread our mission. Thank you. Now back to the episode. Good morning, everybody, to the third episode of the Resilient Compass podcast. My name is Jason Cozens, and today I'm here with my co-host, Andy Schectman. We've got a full rundown today. We're, of course, going to be talking about Black Monday's reversers, how actually the discussion we had last week on West-East Airport Corridor Challenges is coming true with some events that happened this week since that pod. What is the next bubble is probably on a lot of people's minds, something we can discuss. And last but not least, Lionel Shriver's book, The Mandibles. I've got the book here. I'm going to be talking a little bit about it, and there's going to be some giveaways. So please wait until the end in order to see what that's all about. But anyway, let's get straight to it. The Black Monday reverses. So Andy, equities around the world completely rebounded on Tuesday from the previous day's aggressive sell-off. I think the S&P added back over $1 trillion of market cap on Friday. And the market continues to find relief in the comments from the Bank of Japan. And that yen carry trade seems to be alive for now. I mean, what are your thoughts on the subject?
I think that the reactionary environment, the way that the markets move in a reactionary fashion are laughable. And I think we should realize we're sitting on the razor's edge. I mean, let's go back to 2019. The Fed tries to implement austerity. They try to start to normalize their balance sheet. They raise rates a little bit, and you get the repo market crisis, and things start to bust apart. So they pivot. Let's look at what happened in the UK. They try to implement austerity and normalize their balance sheet, and you blow up the pensions, and they pivot. And then we talk about raising rates here to 5% on the 10-year Treasury. Granted, we did 150 or 500 basis points in a year, which is pretty darn quick in an environment where rates have been kept so low for so long, but everything starts to break. So now we're talking about pivoting. And you look at what happened in the UK. They raised their rates just a little bit in strength in the UK, and it starts to break apart everything from Singapore to South Korea to the United States. And now they're pivoting. And I think this is a symptom of 20 plus years worth of manipulated interest rates. And when you mess with Mother Nature will have her pound of flesh one way or another. And I think it just goes to show how trapped the whole Western system is between inflation and normalization or austerity. And all governments have chosen the path of least resistance, which is inflation. You get Jeremy Siegel coming on CNBC almost in tears, begging for a 150-point basis reduction. But, Jeremy's supposed to be such a smart dude. In my book, if you drop the U.S. interest rate short term in an emergency Fed meeting by 150 basis points, doesn't that just exacerbate the unwinding of the carry trade? Because the carry trade, if the yen goes up or interest on the yen goes up, or the return on the treasury market that they're investing in goes down, aren't they one and the same thing? And so this is a market where evidently everyone thinks a weaker dollar and lower interest rates is the road to prosperity. And in my mind, it's the opposite of that. Austrian economics teaches about savings leading to investment and reinvestment. And it's pretty damn hard to save when interest rates are next to nothing in an inflationary environment. You go backwards. That incentivizes debt accumulation and speculation, a la the Keynesian dream. And so this is something that is a failed experiment. And you got the Western talking heads begging for lower rates to stimulate the market again, to give it another shot of heroin. Instead of in 2008, Jason, when this all started with the great financial crisis, they should have let the forest fire burn. The whole system would have come back healthier and stronger than ever. Instead, the Fed's balance sheet back then was $800 billion, and a year ago was $9 trillion. So they added over $8 trillion worth of bonds in mortgage-backed securities or treasuries, which dropped interest rates, which created inflation, but which created illusions in asset value. And this is the problem. Stocks, bonds, real estate, all spiked to the moon in the face of massively cratering manipulated interest rates. And the price discovery that comes with rising interest rates, well, that's Mother Nature's way of saying, ha, 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 here I am. Yeah. And what do they do when they run headfirst into Mother Nature? They turn and head tail out that way. And that's why this is a problem. Either you just continue to do what all politicians have done. And by the way, that's why there are ridges on the sides of coins, because going all the way back to Roman times, they cut the edges of the coins, to pay the soldiers all around the world in their far-reaching, expanding economy.
Well, they came out with a new design. Let's put a hole through the aureus. And
well, there you go.
Design. Yeah.
The point of it is, man, is they're trapped, and either they do inflation or they do let the whole system blow apart. And you can see just a little rise in the yen or interest rates thereof in a market that's been zero-bound interest rates for 2+ decades in a currency that's collapsed. They try to take care of their own, and they blow up the global economy. This is a problem, and it's not just in Japan, it's all around the Western system.
It sure is. I mean, I think they've got $9.2 trillion worth of debt, which is about 263% of their GDP. And I think the reason why they started to put up interest rates was that their inflation rate's starting to grow again. It's heading towards 4%. Of course, as they put up interest rates, of course, their own interest payments on their own debt increases, and that's unsustainable. They're in a between a rock and a hard place. And as you said, this is all central banks having the same problem, and the U.S. federal debt obviously.
Well, see, that's also the problem. If the dollar gets too strong, it blows everyone else up. If it gets too weak, it destroys things and distorts things here. This is why central bankers just should go. We went, 180 years on a gold standard without any inflation or any problems, and contrary to popular demand. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but I think it's a problem, and it's one that this is not the end of it just because we have a week of calm as the Japanese financial minister backs off of his aspirations of strengthening the yen and raising interest rates.
Yeah, it's a slow motion train crash. And as you said, and if they tried to fix it back in 20 years ago, they might have had a chance of fixing it. But now, of course,
that's right.
There's no chance. And so, we go on to the next subject, really, which is what is the next bubble. I mean, we had the dot-com bubble burst in 2000. We had the credit housing bubble burst in 2008. We've had the QE bond bubble burst in 21-22, and the crypto bubble after that. And now maybe the AI bubble may be bursting. So all of this, of course, all of these bubbles are catalyzed by the easy money, by the magic money tree, and combined often with technological change as well. we've got to ask ourselves, what's the next question? Is it going to be that massive injections of money again by the Fed into the system is going to lead to another stock market boom, or is it likely to be gold as the Fed tries to ease to save the commercial property market or the regional banking system?
In my mind, it would be the market. And I think you could very well see a stock market that goes wildly higher in the face of a massively inflated dollar. But when measured against its value in numbers of ounces of gold, it will lose ground, as it has been doing for a while now. And I think there's not enough gold, number one, to really create a bubble when you have the central banks buying the way that they are. And the central banks are making every appearance, to me, and there's all sorts of empirical evidence, including the new unit settlement token, which we've talked about, which is, according to Dilma Rousseff, the former president of Brazil and the president or the head of the BRICS New Development Bank, which is akin to the IMF of the West, that they've already agreed in principle to the unit, which is 40% gold backed. And maybe this is why you're seeing all the central banks. In fact, I know we're going to talk about this. I don't mean to jump ahead here, but for the first 6 months of the year, bought more gold than at any time ever, only surpassing last year's first 6 months. So the central banks are accumulating gold as if they know something, as if something is already on the table. And so when we talk about gold being in a bubble, I don't think so, because it will be held by the strongest hands on the planet. When we talk about the stock market being a bubble, yes, because I think it could go massively higher, but higher in a inflated manner. Measured against something stable like gold, it will lose ground precipitously, would be my opinion.
Yeah, and I've been looking at the charts actually just in the last hour. The gold price is going through another surge. I think it reached nearly $2,500 an ounce just in the last 24 hours. It's clearly in a bull market, and that's what I find really interesting about this, Andy, is that this is even in the situation where Western mainstream investors are not even engaged. I mean, we saw massive ETF outflows at a time when the rest of the world's been buying this. And of course, we talked about some of these bubbles being affected by technology. One of the things is, of course, that the technological advances that companies like Glint are making, of course, brings a complete new utility to gold. Glint allows ownership outside the banking system, but more importantly, enables it to be used as money, as everyday currency. So I think that there's a huge amount of momentum. And of course, you doubled down not just on the macroeconomic side of things, but as we've been discussing, the geopolitical side of things have never been more concerning. And with the BRICS nations as well looking to develop their own currency, and the Bank of International Settlements coming out saying that with all of the elections coming up in lots of parts of the world, there's a lot of concern about what governments are doing in terms of easing the pain for their citizens, but at the same time creating more continued long-term problems for them.
Yeah, I mean, if you would have told me, Jason, I've been doing this for 34 years. I know I only look like I'm 27, but I've really been doing this for 34 years. And if you would have told me at any time in my career, man, that there would be, 11 plus states already ratifying laws to allow gold and silver to be used as legal tender, I would have said you're insane. There's just no way. With more on the horizon, I would have said, geez, that's just a heavy lift. The fact that we're seeing it is, to me, emblematic of the American spirit. It's funny that it gets no attention by the Western media whatsoever. You have to listen to this podcast to know it. Or, I've talked about it, and certainly the work of the Sound Money Defense League and all of the good efforts that are being done around the country in all of these red states to recognize gold and silver, which goes back to the Constitution, as legal tender for all debts, public and private. That's something that's amazing. It's fantastic. And I think it's something that people need to take a step back and realize. When we realize that from Joe and Jane Sixpack to the Harvard Endowment Fund, the allocation in gold really to the American system is less than 0.5%. When you realize that in relationship to the bond market, to the stock market, and to the amount of money that's been created, the amount of gold that is available is the pimple on the elephant's ass. The potential for gold to really accentuate itself in the face of American public investment interest for something like this. Because all of this movement in gold we've seen has been directed by the central banks and by Asian buying by their public, as the Western participation has been in the ETFs falling at a 45-degree angle. That in the face of a strong dollar, if you believe the CPI, the CPI, and the information that comes out of the the BLS, which tells us, tries to tell us how much inflation is, which is a lie. And anyways, the bottom line is, if you believe that, we have positive real yield and a strong dollar, coupled with lack of American investment, which, how is gold at all-time highs? Shouldn't it be going the other way? Interesting. So when you realize that the central banks and all of this is what this is doing, because it is the central banks and Asian buying that's raising the price, you add into it the American public and the realization by everyone, not just the people who are hard money, not just the people who listen to this kind of show, but everyone who realizes in the face of a massively declining dollar, when it hits them in the face like an inflated brick of $100 bills, that they need to protect themselves. These states that are allowing it, the demand could be extraordinary. Now, I don't sell gold as an investment, but to me, it's wealth. And that's one of the reasons I like Glint. It's money, and Glint enables you to use it as money. But when I buy physical gold and silver, I hold it not as an investment. To me, it's my wealth. Yeah. And so I'll just simply say that this realization is one of the biggest things I've ever seen in my career. No question about it.
Yeah, I never thought that when I set up Glint or had the idea for Glint in 2008, that actually we'd have US states working on this type of initiative. I'm actually in Texas this week because I've been invited to speak to legislators and treasurers across the whole country who are coming here to discuss, transactional gold, gold and silver as legal tender, as you said, as is their right under the Constitution, Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1, which states that no state may make a currency except, of course, gold and silver. And I think what's really great in this country is the balance that the US states have with the Fed, or should have. And I think that balance is that power that the state has to counter what the Fed has been doing is now, the legislature is starting to wake up and say we need to use our powers. And so there's this really strong movement. And we're talking about, I think last time I counted, up to 20 US states who are considering working on drafting or even have passed bills dealing with or concerning or in relation to making gold and silver legal tender. And I'm privileged to be here and at all times speaking to some of these people and explain how easy this can be with a platform like Glint. Literally, we're doing this already. And some might say, well, if you're doing this already, why does the state need to get involved? Well, the state needs to get involved because, number one, to protect the rights of citizens to be able to use gold and silver as money, because, of course, the Fed could make changes in the future to legislation. But with the state's backing, they wouldn't be able to do that. And, of course, the other thing is to challenge the tax status on gold and silver, which the IRS currently classify gold and silver as even gold and silver species, such as the gold and silver US dollar, the eagle, as collectibles. You can't use them to transact. Really, you're just collecting them. Well, of course, this all changes when the state authorizes a gold and silver currency, and it all changes when it's combined with a platform like Glint to actually enable it to be used as money. So it's super exciting. What has everybody been waiting for? Even the whole cryptocurrency community as well, and the gold community. We want a reintroduction of sound money, and if you can't get central banks to do it, then I thought what we needed to do was create a bottom-up return to sound money. What we've got here is actually regional governments, US states getting behind it, and it's on both sides of the aisle. It's been supported in a lot of states with co-sponsors by Democrats as well, because this is an issue to do with economic justice. This is to do with giving everybody an equal opportunity to prosper. So it's really exciting. I think maybe next week we can talk about it some more, Andy, once I've been, tell you what happened at the conference. So
I'd love to know. And, it's interesting when you frame it states versus Fed. Now, the Fed just hates gold because it is the kryptonite, if you will, to the system. The illusion of a strong dollar and a strong bond market and the tether to irresponsible fiscal policy and the whims of politicians who always choose inflation over austerity. And you mentioned the collectible capital gains rate of 28%. They hate it so much that they do that same rate on ETFs, which you can't even take possession of, 28%, to disincentivize people from even thinking such heresy that you would ever want to use gold as money instead of, the pieces of paper that it's interesting too when you think about how the whole world uses currency from a broke nation as money and accepts it worldwide. It's one thing that we are forced to in the United States. It's another thing that it's the world reserve currency. Even stranger that they accept debt from a broken, insolvent country, and you cross that 130 debt to GDP. We're right there. We're really close to it. You never come back. There's never been an example of it where a country crosses 130 debt to GDP and doesn't either hyperinflate or default. But that, I think, leads me to one of the things I really wanted to talk about with you, and that is the article in Forbes magazine. Because most of the articles that I've seen, if not all, or the commercial, or not commercials, like spots on CNN or Fox or whatever, when they talk about gold, they say it could be really bullish and then, but, and the but always, spills hot water on whatever positive vibe there would have been regarding the message. And I look at Forbes as a part of the establishment. But anyways, there was an article. I just wanted to read it real quick because I think it's one of the very first times I've seen an article in a Western outlet that is very favorable to gold. Now, is that article you put up from Forbes also?
Yeah.
Well, now they're two in a row, and I think that maybe Forbes is starting to get the drift. So let me just read something to you. It says it's called "It's Hard to Believe, but the World is Beginning to Lurch Towards a Gold-Based Monetary System. This, despite the fact that the historical gold standard is held in almost universal contempt by economists and financial officials. Contrary to numerous myths based on ignorance, the system worked. The U.S. was on a gold-based system for 180 years until the early 1970s. We never had inflation when the dollar's value was tied to the yellow metal, and the U.S. experienced the greatest long-term economic growth in human history. The signs of change are here. One is that the central banks in recent years have been purchasing gold at record levels. Buyers include China, India, and Russia, and a number of other nations such as Poland. These countries are reacting to growing doubts about the long-term value of the dollar, which in turn is a symptom of the perceived decline of the United States. Now, I want to pause right here for two things. One, when I'm done reading this, I want to mention one thing about the head of the lead fund, or the head of the Central Bank of Poland, Adam Glapiński, because Poland is top of the food chain in buying gold lately. And I want to read something to you that he said that is very concerning. And number two, I think that you're looking at a situation where if Trump wins, he will appoint Judy Shelton. And Judy Shelton is a advocate of the gold standard, and she recently talked about issuing 30-year treasuries redeemable in gold to inspire confidence and demand for the longer maturity, longer dated treasuries. So listen to what he had to say here. India last year began experimenting with gold-based government bonds. Monetary expert Nathan Lewis, who co-authored our book, Inflation, What It Is, Why It's Bad, and How to Fix It, observes, these would probably have been very popular with investors worldwide. From the start of the floating currency era in 1971 to the present, a gold bond paying 4% would have outperformed every stock and bond market worldwide. Almost done here. Zimbabwe, which must hold the record for hyperinflation, recently announced the launch of a new currency fixed to gold. Deep skepticism is warranted that this government has the discipline to make such an arrangement work, but the move is a sign of things to come. I think it's very interesting that when you talk about the way that this is moving into, now you're beginning to hear, yeah, well, this is something, believe it or not, it's happening. And so whether it's in the States or whether it's much bigger than that, and it's a global reserve standard pegged to gold, this is why I think a bubble in gold is unlikely, because if indeed we are moving to some sort of a revision in the price of gold. And, you can't make it up. Gold is held in the gold revaluation account, as we keep getting reminded, not only by the head of the Dutch National Bank, but of course by Senator Loomis from Wyoming, who gave the speech we talked about at the Bitcoin conference, who advocates for funding part of this strategic reserve fund of Bitcoin by revaluing the Federal Reserve's gold. I just wanted to read one interesting thing to you. If I have it, I might not have it. Here it is right here. Okay, so I just found this interesting. Lipinski talked about why they own gold. And he says, gold will retain its value even when someone cuts off the power to the global financial system, destroying traditional assets based on electric accounting records. Of course, we do not assume this will happen, but as the saying goes, forewarned is always insured. And the central bank is required to be prepared for even the most unfavorable circumstances. That's why we see a special place for gold in our foreign exchange management. And the head of the Dutch National Bank, who keeps referencing the gold revaluation account, why do they hold it in the name of the gold revaluation account? I wonder. But anyways, I digress. He says, this has been a political decision to hold gold because if there's a financial crisis, the gold price will skyrocket and official gold reserves can be used to underpin a new gold standard, according to the Dutch National Bank. So what I'm saying is, look at the crumbs that they leave. They're leaving crumbs. Now, can you put them back together into a cookie? It's not hard to do it. Doesn't mean it's going to be right. Don't know. But what I am saying to you, Jason, is I believe this is a generational opportunity in gold, which I believe is wealth. And I believe the central bankers know it's wealth. Why else would the BIS have reclassified it the only other tier one asset in the world? They are accumulating it because it will be part of a new system. And this is why Jim Sinclair used to always say gold will go, he way undersold it. He said 10,000. I think it'll go massively higher than that. And it will be pegged to a new system, never to come back down. It'll be agreed upon that this is backing of a new system and held mostly by the very strongest hands in the world, the central banks. So the biggest problem that the people listening to this show will ever face as it pertains to gold is getting access to it. Because the big money, I think, will realize that this is something that is a necessity and will be part of a new system. I don't think they'll confiscate gold the way Roosevelt did in 33 over my shoulder, because you have like GLD and SLV held by JP Morgan and BlackRock and HSBC Bank, so they can come and take all the ETFs, which you can't take possession of anyway, have their cake and eat it too, and say, we didn't impose nationalization of assets, eminent domain, all of these things. And when all of the states are embracing gold, I don't think it's confiscation. What I do think it is that the ETFs will be taken and the ability to access gold either on your platform or physical gold will become very challenging in an environment where the world realizes that the only way to make the system work will be to underpin it with a gold standard or something to that degree.
Which is why I think the US states initiatives are so important. I actually got a little funny story about Forbes. So Steve Forbes wrote that article, I've just checked. And of course, he's the editor-in-chief of Forbes. And I knew that he'd written quite favorable stories about gold in the past. And so when we launched back in, I think it was September 2019, I was in New York touring the different news outlets, CNBC, Yahoo Finance, and so on, and telling people about the launch of Glint. And I wanted to get Steve Forbes' attention, and we hadn't been able to get through to him or get any response for him. But I thought, well, what an excellent way to get some amplification about what we were doing at Glint. So I headed over after I'd done my interviews to the Forbes building on the other side of the river. And I just blagged my way into the building. I went past security, all the way up to the very top floor, and met Steve Forbes' secretary. He told me that he wasn't in, and I said I'm quite happy to wait. Anyway, I did wait for hours, and he literally, I don't think, was in. So I wrote him a letter, but I didn't hear anything back. So Steve, if you're listening, please get in contact with us and find out what we're doing with this project at Glint, this incredible new utility we're bringing it, and what the US states are doing.
One of the things that you could also do maybe to get to him, the folks that run Freedom Fest have had him there several times.
Yeah.
You could probably reach out to the folks running Freedom Fest and ask them to pass along a message. He's part of the same community.
Yeah.
He's a gold advocate. So the gentleman who runs it. So you never know. It might not be a bad place to go, but we can always use mainstream on our side. It's been an uphill battle for a very long time, and it would be nice if we do have some journalistic integrity out there by the mainstream, rather than you and I having to do this to shout from the rooftops to open people's eyes that believe that the road to retirement is only and always paved with mutual funds and stock certificates. And the craziness of believing that gold fits into this portfolio in any way, or that it could provide a utility, because it's a barbarous relic from the past, of course. So a little bit of journalistic integrity from mainstream effort like that would be very cool. So I'll see if I can rattle some bushes too and get them to give you a holler back.
Yeah, that would be cool. So everybody just subscribe now, because we'll be doing another show, of course, next week, and that'll be after this conference of US state treasurers and legislators. I can give you a bit of an update on that. But one of the interesting things, of course, was that last week we spoke about the increasing challenges that the geopolitical situation was having on west to east travel. I just traveled through to Singapore on the way to Indonesia on a holiday with the family, and got speaking to the pilot, if you remember from last week's episode. And we talked about the challenges that were probably going to be coming from the fact that Russian airspace was blocked off, and that the war in the Middle East was growing. Well, just literally a day, 24 hours after we aired that podcast, then British Airways announced they will be dropping flights to Beijing from October, as it feels the impact of being banned from Russian airspace. This is the exact type of real world effects that it has on everybody's everyday lives suddenly coming into the fore. And actually, I think it was just yesterday that Singapore Airlines decided they would be reducing their flight schedule to and from London Heathrow. And it's surprising because, as I understand it, this is their cash cow route, where the carrier is usually trying to increase its presence rather than scaling it back. But we're seeing this is the effects of war on our planet, which, although it does seem to be far away for a lot of people, now it's starting to have effects on global travel.
I think it's easy to suspend your thoughts when you think about something as awful as war, but when it starts to affect you, you start to understand that there are unintended consequences that are far-reaching. And I don't think this is going to get any better anytime soon, of course, with what's happening in the Middle East, with the buildup of military presence in the Gulf. And of course, now you have China and Russia openly saying they will back Iran. You have the UK and the United States saying they'll back Israel. God forbid this turns into something worse. And the worst it is to all of us is to be inconvenienced with having to take multiple flights in a very non-linear route in order to make it to where we need to be. But let's just hope that's the worst it becomes, because I think if all it is a great inconvenience, great. But I have a feeling that probably that's not the case. So let's hope. But yeah, it was prophetic in its own way, and it's easy to see how that would be. I certainly wouldn't want to be flying through through airspace in the midst of a war and be the casualty of a mistake. So let's hope that doesn't continue to increase.
There's lots of problems there. I mean, obviously Ukraine's just burst into Russian soil in quite a dramatic way. It will be interesting to see what Russia does. But of course, what you don't want, or what we worry about, of course, apart from, obviously the tremendous heartache that's going on for those people in the Middle East and in Russia as for these things to escalate. But what you don't want is someone like Putin to get backed into a corner and do something much worse than any of us could be thinking. Yeah, I wish I do pray that everybody that these conflicts end as quickly as possible.
Too many of them too often, but got to keep the military-industrial complex in business.
Well, that's maybe one of the benefits of a financial crisis, is that people have got to reevaluate the forever wars that they're experiencing, of course. And
well, the forever wars are hard to finance in a currency that is losing global demand and acceptance. And when we go back, when we talk again about the dollar just being its value is that of confidence. whatever, the full faith and credit. You talk about the credit, $35 trillion in debt, which doesn't include Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and government military pensions. We're more like 200 trillion in debt. We're adding $1 trillion every 100 days. That's $100,000 every second, 24/7. We're broke. We're insolvent. We're weaponizing the dollar, where we, both us and the European Union, steal Russian assets and give it in the form of weapons to the Ukraine. That's not a good thing. That's a line you don't come back from. So, there are a lot of things going on that I don't think we've seen the end of it yet, quite frankly. I think it's very important people kind of rein things in right now and look to the wisdom of gold, because, we got just a few short months, not only to the big BRICS meeting in October, where you want to talk about a black swan, if indeed in September in China, where they have this meeting to ratify the unit as the settlement currency, the common settlement currency, and then actually roll it out and issue it in October. You want to talk about a black swan heading into the election? There it is. I mean, there's something called Operation Sandman. And now I can't speak to the validity of it, but it talks about 150 plus nations, I believe, that have agreed all in unison to dump dollars in treasuries. Well, what better time to do it than after ratifying a new settlement currency for energy, which would obliterate the demand for dollars and for treasuries and replace it with gold and central bank digital currencies from these sovereign nations, leading into election where countries like Iran certainly don't want Trump back in office, and probably most of them don't, because of the challenges that they would face with the Trump administration versus the lack of strength, perception anyways, with the current. And so, yeah, I have a feeling things are going to get very, very interesting, Jason. I truly do. I think our shows leading up until the election will be some really interesting ones. And I know we're going to have some guests on real soon. But I'm looking forward to riding shotgun with you, brother, because I really do think it's going to be, let's just say, if anyone really thinks it's going to be a smooth ride between here and the end of the year, I have some oceanfront real estate to sell you in Minneapolis. I don't think it's going to be that way. So I hope I'm wrong. But as the Chinese curse says, may you live in interesting times.
Yeah, it's dark times ahead. This whole podcast is about, educating ourselves about what is going on so we can be better prepared. I set Glint up so it can create a glint of hope, a glint of light in these dark times, which brings us on really what you're saying to this book, which I started reading. I did buy it actually a year ago. I've just not had time to read it. I've started reading it now. It's a book by Lionel Shriver. She's wrote this book in 2016, and it's called The Mandibles. In God We Trusted, The Mandibles, a family 2029 to 2047. So it's kind of set in the near future. I'm going to read you just what it says on the back of this book. It says the US national debt has grown so enormous that it can never be repaid. The dollar is in meltdown. A bloodless international currency war will wipe out the savings of millions of American families. Their pending inheritance turned to ash. Each member of the formerly formidable Mandible family must contend first with disappointment, then the challenge of sheer survival as they navigate a society in ruin. So I'm going to be reading this. I encourage you guys to read it too. If you put some comments in the down below on the video about why you think this might be an interesting book to be reading now. It seemed a little bit prescient. She wrote it in 2016. She must have been writing it way before then. Then write your comments in there. We'll be giving out 5 books to you guys, to some of you who will be listening. So put some comments in the bar. If you've read the book already as well, please put some comments in about that too. I mean, basically everything you were saying just at near the end, Andy, is what she wrote about in 2016.
Well, that's very cool. Smart lady, evidently. No, I'm teasing. Yeah, no, Jason, I think that's cool. You told me a little bit about that book before we started filming, and I think that I think these are the kind of realities that we're now facing. So rather than not being able to see what's coming and be blindsided by it, as most people will never be able to see what's coming and therefore have no ability to get out of the way of what is coming, I'd rather know what's coming, be able to survive and maybe even thrive, because people focus very often on gold's role as being something for a calamity. you're proving that it can be used as a utility. And I think there'll be opportunities at the same time when the dust settles. This isn't the end of the Western world, but there will be changes. And those people who have been able to proactively sidestep and maneuver these changes in what the biggest money in the world is accumulating, I think you have a better chance to get out of the way, to survive and to thrive and to find opportunities when the dust settles. So yeah, it should be fun to ride shotgun with you over the next few months leading up to the election and watch this all unfold in real time.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen the biggest transfer of wealth from the middle classes and everybody else into, you know, a privileged few of being able to benefit significantly from this magic money tree, this hose pipe of money that's pumped into the system, the Cantillon effect that we talked about briefly in our first episode, that we'll be talking probably about over a whole episode sometime in the next few months. That means that those closest to the money supply benefit disproportionately from everybody else. But actually, we could have the reverse transfer of wealth. The ability for everybody to get on board the train, and so to speak, the one that's gold-backed, the gold-based train, and give themselves a better opportunity to prosper as we go through these challenges. So, thank you everybody for listening today. Andy, thanks again. It's been great to talk to you as always.
Likewise,
Everybody,
my man.
please subscribe. You've got some great episodes coming up. You want to be alerted to those. Put your comments below about generally what you're thinking about everything in the episode, about your thoughts on Lionel Shriver's book, The Mandibles, and also subscribe. All right. So until next week, I'll see you all later. See you, Andy.
Cheers. See you, buddy.